It's not very often that an airport adds another runway.
What you see now is a parallel runway doubling the capacity for the coming 40 years. That is long-term thinking.
There was no rule book for this, there was no guidelines or anything. We had to make this one up.
This runway has put a foundation under the continued growth of Queensland.
The new runway at Brisbane Airport is going to be a game changer for South East Queensland, for Brisbane as a city. This new runway will connect the world and will create a future for Brisbane Airport as well as the state.
We used to joke when I was in the tourism part of business that Brisbane's better experienced than explained.
Brisbane is a new world city. Everyone is very proud of the city. And it has seen tremendous change in the last 5 years.
If you look at Australia, we are an island continent. To connect to the world, it's by air.
Airlines connect the world. You cannot have good trade. You cannot have boosting tourism. You cannot have a successful economy if you are not connected to the rest of the world.
So your airport becomes really part of, in my opinion, the whole fabric of how we as a sophisticated nation and society operate.
Brisbane is a very attractive place to live, work and visit. That means the population is growing and people love to travel. At the same time, the city is also becoming more attractive, so more people want to visit Brisbane. A few years ago we had challenges during peak hours with on-time performance because the runway system we were operating then was just too busy. That's the main driver for the fact that we needed more runway capacity for Brisbane Airport.
You always want to be ahead of the problem. If you are too late with infrastructure, you get all problems.
I think from the first time 3 levels of government decided to move the Brisbane Airport to this site, that runway was anticipated and planned.
Building a runway is challenging. It's never easy, especially when you do it in a brownfield situation and not as a new runway at a new airport. So there has been a lot of planning involved in this runway, and that started actually in the early 1970s. So that's more than 50 years ago.
This wasn't about what runway did we need for the next 10 or 20 years. It was always, what runway do we need in that 2050 onwards?
We have a parallel runway system. It's 2 kilometers separated, yeah? And in between basically are the terminals.
A parallel system which increases the capacity of the airport significantly from the current 50 air traffic movements an hour to up to 105, maybe even 110 movements in the future. The runway is long, 3,300 meters, and it's 60 meters wide. And that's what a proper runway should look like at this time in the world.
Protection of the environment was uppermost in our minds at all times in this project. We had 500 plus environmental conditions that had to be complied with in the construction phase of the project.
I can still remember being called to a meeting and then the bottom line and just the deadly silence. We're talking about $1 billion.
Well, certainly for Australia, it was the first time we've seen a project that's privately funded. No one had been there, no one had done this.
Probably the challenge at the time was to convince the airlines that we needed that runway. That was one. But second, that they had to pay for it together with us. And they were not too keen to do that at the time. The challenge that, I suppose, is still the hardest to my mind and was still the one that was the most satisfying, was getting the airlines across the line.
That toughness and the preparedness by our senior management of the board in 2012 to really say, we need this, we know there's a way of affording it, but I don't think anyone other than that small group inside BAC realised just how tough those decisions were back then.
The thing that was the last piece of that puzzle was Qantas coming on board. So when Alan and I finally were able to sign that commercial agreement, I knew we were going to build a runway.
building a runway close to an airport that's operational is always challenging. In this particular case, we built a runway in what was former the mouth of the Brisbane River.
360 hectares of vegetation had to be cleared. It was all mulched and formed into stockpiles to create topsoil for later use on the project. A major drainage was required. A lot of that excavation was of acid sulphate soils, and those acid sulphate soils had to be treated, and then once treated they were also used on the site. There's about 250,000 cubic metres of soil reused on the site.
The airport is situated in basically a delta. It is the worst soil for an airport.
The aim of the new parallel project was to make the new platform for the new runway. So as the area was on a swamp, it needed a massive load of sand to get it to elevation.
The original calculation of the sand was 17 million cubic meter. That is 1 meter sand, 1 meter sand, yeah, 1 meter sand, 1 meter wide, from here to Amsterdam. Can you imagine?
You've got to find sand that's 250 microns. Now 250 microns is 0.25 of a millimetre. So it's about like a human hair. And of course we had to only find 12 million cubic metres of it and make sure it wasn't an area where there was seagrass, recreational fishing, commercial fishing, that it wasn't a turtle habitat, there wasn't dugongs, there wasn't migratory whales. Having found that, then we had to work out that a dredge could actually get into a shipping channel, get it to the port of Brisbane, and then just pump it 5 kilometres to the airport.
That distance normally people would reclaim for beach replenishment or for a small reclamation. You pump out over, let's say, 2-3 kilometres, but pumping out over 8 kilometres, that's something you don't do. Even we don't do that every single day of the week. This is a piece of infrastructure under extremely tight control because aircraft will be landing on this very soon, so you need to get stuff right.
The Dryenda Road underpass is the critical link between the new runway and the airport terminal facilities, and provides the link to the general aviation area, the Royal Flying Doctor area.
One of the challenges with Brisbane Airport being right on Moreton Bay is we have what's called a really high groundwater. So that groundwater sits at times about 1 metre to 1.5 metres below surface level. So here we're going to have to build an underpass that went down 6 metres. The force of that water is wanting to push that out of the ground. The only way to build it was to build it in a watertight chamber. And so McConnell Dale was our contractor, and they came up with the smarts.
The engineering challenges that we had to overcome to actually build this big structure below seabed level in basically a swamp.
When you think you've got to build a bridge, it's going to take the weight of an A380 and probably 300,000 litres of fuel as well. You realise the size and the complexity of these sort of structures.
The project itself consisted of 20,000 cubic metres of very heavily reinforced concrete. We had 700 precast piles that were driven underneath the structure to actually hold it down. We had 900 metres of sheet piling just to protect the out of the structure so we could dig it out. At the peak we employed 250 people. About 87% to 90% of those people were all local to the region. And we ended up pumping over 1 billion litres of water while we were dewatering the structure during construction.
On a project of this size and scale, this one looks on the face of it quite straightforward. The difference is the environment with which we work. There's a lot at stake. We've got reputation to maintain, we've got to ensure our workers stay safe and that we deliver the project the client wants. So we get small windows, largely at night, under a very tight time frame, and we're working 24/7 to ensure it's reopened on time every time, making sure our works don't delay planes. Construction of a runway might sound simple, but it relies on huge numbers of people. We've had almost 4,000 people engaged through 320 odd different subcontractors over the course of the last 3 years. So it's quite an undertaking to pull all that together.
We wanted to use recycled water because there was a very large water requirement in the formulation of the concrete mixtures and also the wetting down of the site to keep wind-blown materials flying off the site, as well as making sure that the landscape grasses actually took in the airfield. So there was a huge water component, of which we contacted QUU at the Luggage Point Treatment Centre and negotiated a pipeline as an offtake from Luggage Point for Class A treated water.
Skyway, our airfield works contractor, had to start shaping the sand. We then had to bring in 1.2 million tonnes of rock.
There was over 175,000 cubic metres of concrete placed in the taxiways and approximately 80,000 tonnes of asphalt placed on the runway.
I think pavement construction was about 15 months. You then had to put in 2,200 lights, 300 kilometres of cables in the ground, topsoil to get the grassing going.
The runway itself is 3.3 kilometres long, 60 metres wide. It's a massive area.
The total airfield is 360 hectares. We're creating an airfield almost half the size of Sydney Airport.
It came clear through the course of the project that we faced many challenges, and a lot of these challenges relate to the site-specific conditions, working in a large sandpit effectively that's charged with a lot of water. So we worked as a team. We established some working groups with Brisbane Airport Corporation, with the Skyway joint venture and with Jacobs the designer to work out the best solution for each challenge that we faced.
This scale of project is very significant for air services. We haven't put a new runway into a capital city for a generation. So across the program we've had 5 projects supporting the new runway here at Brisbane. We've had a brand new fire station built. We've had work in the tower. We've had new infrastructure installed as well on the airfield. We've had radios on the mountaintops around Brisbane and fibre optics under the ground. And of course we've had the airspace component.
Airspace in Brisbane is not all about Brisbane Airport. It's a very, very, very busy part of the world. We have airports at Coolangatta and the Sunshine Coast. We have the biggest and busiest Air Force base in Australia at Amberley. We have Archerfield. We have Redcliffe, which they use mainly for parachute. We also have Warwick and 2 airports in Toowoomba. And we all sort of have to share the same broad base and airspace. So we had to plan and put in that new runway and a very efficient airspace in that context where no one lost.
The other important thing for the airspace design for our new runway project was how do we maximise that future capacity. The best way of handling that airspace was to split it on a geographic basis. Flights arriving or departing to southern and eastern ports would go off the existing runway. The north and the western airports, so North Queensland, Asia, the Middle East, would all come off the new runway.
So we needed to consider that invisible network that planes use to move across the sky and make sure that when the new runway came online, it plugged into that invisible network. Our new flight paths at Brisbane have been designed to maximise over the bay operations, so the people of Brisbane, me included, can get a good night's sleep. Also our flight paths are as efficient as possible, so we descend the aircraft from their cruising levels directly and as close to the airport as we can. So again, reducing emissions and keeping that noise so the aircraft engines aren't powering up during those phases of flight. They're as quiet as they can.
We're not building this runway for our shareholders. We're not building this runway for Brisbane Airport. We're building this runway for the community. Probably the most important failure that I could have envisioned was not so much related to the development of the physical structure. It was more about community support for the runway.
For a runway, bringing it in commission is probably, in many ways, could be the hardest challenge of all. One of the ambitions I had for this project is that as we brought it into commission, we did it in a way there was no surprises, that people were well informed, but thirdly that we had taken into account how best to manage those flight paths in light of community exposure to noise.
Senior management and our board decided that our approach going forward would be one of informing everyone. Full transparency. We had to get out there as a BAC and we had to tell people about this project.
How accepting the community is of our efforts to commission this runway, I think that will be the final indication of whether it's been a big success. And it could be the first time in the world where, the community feels that an airport has done as much as is possible to get this optimised. Oh, I think that would be probably one of the proudest moments of my life.
It's been a long time in the making. We've been working for at least 8 years in terms of construction on this runway, and then to see it finally open for operations is amazing.
For the first time, runway 01 left, cleared for takeoff.
This is the first flight to take off from runway 01 left, 19 right, the brand new parallel runway here at B&E.
It was my honour to lead that formation in the L-79 Albatross. On my right-hand wing I had a Mark 16 Spitfire and on my left-hand wing a P-51D Mustang, so it was a great day for me.
Here we have the first arrival on the brand new Brisbane runway.
It's almost surreal that now finally we were able to open the runway, see the first planes departing and arriving. It's unbelievable.
Ultimately in 2012, I think the estimate was just under 1.3 and hence the 1.3 billion. Julianne was here then as CEO and I remember sitting in her office giving her a commitment that my team would deliver this on time and under budget. And I'm just gobsmacked, my team and designers and contractors and BAC, we've actually beat that. We're 200 million under.
We can safely say that we did not have a single environmental breach. In essence, we could tick off the box that we had complied 100% with the environmental requirements of all the approvals, both federal, state and local.
Opening the new runway, for me personally, is unbelievable. Developing a runway and doing an investment of $1.1 billion for a relatively small company as BAC requires teamwork. And this project started off 15, 20 years ago in the planning departments. But then it got bigger and bigger and bigger. That's only possible if people from each and every area of the organization are seeing the big picture and are willing to contribute. This is Brisbane Airport's new runway, and it's owned by each and every person that has been working with BAC for the last 20 years.
The new runway at Brisbane has really offered an example to follow for any other runway projects that are undertaken around Australia, not only the design of the airspace, but the engagement with the community, the commitment to environmental outcomes, engagement with industry, and can only lead to better outcomes for our flying public.
This is the one project that really gets me emotional when I talk about it. I call this project my special one because I'm quite sure such one will never come back. I'm planning to visit Queensland and indeed being able to tell to my children, my 3 children and my wife, look, you've seen me, you've heard me traveling to Brisbane. This is actually the spot. We built this piece of land.
To build a runway is a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and I was absolutely rapt.
I felt very proud to be a part of this project. I fly into that airport on a weekly basis, and what it will bring to the economy of Queensland as far as tourism, as far as business, is magnificent.
I know that this runway will have a significant impact on developing the city and the state further. In hotels, in Queen's Wharf, in Howard Smith Wharfs, are because of that prospect of adding additional growth to Brisbane Airport.
It was the best job I ever had, the best team I ever worked with. Yeah, to have been able to have had a chance to be part of that is just remarkable. Proud, wow, bursting with it. Yeah.
I always said that when I started this project that what I'd like to be able to do for me is being able to land when I'm in my 70s or 80s and have a grandchild next to me on the plane and be able to look them in the eye and say, Pop, was part of that. And I'm going to have immense personal pride in what I and my team and this company has achieved.